Most people believe their fire went out. They wake up after an awakening, feeling hollow, drained, and abandoned by the very passion that once carried them forward. They whisper to themselves, "I've lost it. My motivation is gone." But that is the lie of appearances. Your fire didn't die, it molted. Carl Jung discovered this paradox again and again in his patients. The very moment they thought their inner flame was extinguished was, in truth, the moment the old fire had burned itself to ash, making room for a fire of a completely different order. He called this the awakening paradox. Clarity becomes confusion, enlightenment becomes emptiness, and spiritual success becomes psychological crisis. When Jung worked with individuals who had seen through life's illusions, he observed something shocking. Roughly 70% of them lost motivation not because they were failing, but because they were succeeding too well. They had pierced the veil. Every ambition they once clung to, money, recognition, status, even romance, suddenly looked like a stage prop in a forgotten play. Imagine it. One day you are a caterpillar, crawling with purpose, collecting food, chasing goals, measuring success by inches. The next day, you are dissolved into formless goo inside a chrysalis. The drive to crawl is gone, but the wings have not yet formed. Jung called this the Nigredo, the blackening, the death stage of the alchemical process, where your old self has perished, but the new self has not yet taken shape. This is where most people panic. They interpret the silence inside as depression. They try to reignite their old ambitions, forcing themselves back into the pursuit of things they no longer truly desire. Jung warned that this is like trying to put a butterfly back into its cocoon. It is not just impossible, it is betrayal of your own evolution. So let me tell you now, you did not lose your fire. You lost the shell around it. You are in the liminal stage where your old flame has burned itself out, but beneath the ash, the embers of a higher fire are waiting to ignite. This is why you feel empty. This is why nothing excites you. This is why the old motivations taste like ash in your mouth. Because the psyche, as Jung revealed, abhors falsity. It will not let you feed forever on the illusions that once sustained you. Your fire didn't die, it molted. And what you feel as emptiness is not the absence of purpose, it is the clearing away of counterfeit purpose so that the real one can arrive. In Jung's words, you must lose yourself completely before you can find yourself authentically. You thought awakening would set you ablaze with unstoppable purpose. You thought clarity would bring fresh energy. Instead, you found yourself staring at blank walls, unable to summon desire for the very things that once defined you. This is the awakening paradox. Carl Jung noticed it in case after case. The more awakened a patient became, the less motivated they felt. Why? Because awakening unmasks the illusions that once drove us. Think of motivation as a fuel. Before awakening, your fuel was borrowed. You ran on the pressure of society, the hunger of your ego, the scripts of parents and peers. You chased wealth because poverty terrified you. You pursued romance because being alone felt unbearable. You sought achievement because failure seemed like annihilation. All of these were external flames, burning you forward, but none of them were your own. Jung called this persona-driven motivation, the counterfeit energy that comes from living out the expectations of the mask, the public self you learn to wear. The tragedy is that this mask can drive you for decades. Some build empires, raise families, even gain fame, only to feel an unbearable emptiness when they realize their fire was never theirs. Awakening, therefore, is not a gentle blessing. It is demolition. It rips the mask from your face and extinguishes every false flame. And so, you collapse. You do not collapse because you are weak. You collapse because you can no longer run on counterfeit fuel. This is why Jung warned. Trying to return to old motivations after awakening is like trying to reanimate a corpse. The more you try, the more lifeless you feel. But here lies the paradox. What feels like death is, in fact, gestation. Jung compared it to the Nigredo of alchemy, the blackening phase where the prima materia, the raw material of your soul, is dissolved so that something new can emerge. Because the ego has been stripped bare, the psyche is finally free to reveal what Jung called soul-driven motivation. But this new fire cannot be forced. It emerges slowly, quietly, like a whisper from the depths. It feels less like I have to, and more like I get to. It is not pushed by fear, but pulled by love. Therefore, because awakening strips away counterfeit fuel, you feel empty. Because counterfeit fuel is gone, the psyche clears space for authentic desire. Because the psyche abhors emptiness, a new fire will inevitably appear. This is the awakening paradox. Your loss of drive is not a sign of failure, but the clearest evidence that your soul has refused to live on lies any longer. To understand what you are living through, you must learn the map. Not a map of highways or cities, but of inner chemistry, what the alchemists called transformation by fire. Jung devoted decades to studying alchemy, not because he cared for gold, but because he saw in its strange symbols a mirror of the psyche. Behind the furnaces and vessels, he found a roadmap of human rebirth. The first station on that map is Nigredo, the blackening. What is Nigredo? It is psychological decomposition, a dissolution of the structures that once held you together. The alchemists described it as putrefactio, a rotting of the old matter. Jung interpreted it as the death of the false self, the moment when every mask collapses and every counterfeit fire sputters out. Patience described it in words you may recognize. It feels like my routines are collapsing. Time has slowed down. I can't tell if days are passing or if I'm stuck in one eternal pause. Everything tastes gray. The things I once loved feel like cardboard in my mouth. Jung called this state necessary, not optional. Why? Because the psyche cannot birth what is authentic until the counterfeit has decomposed. Because the old identity has died, therefore the new identity can be born. The alchemists drew 4 great stages: Nigredo, blackening; Albedo, whitening; Citrinitas, yellowing; and Rubedo, reddening. These were not colors of metal, but of the soul's fire. Nigredo was always first. Without blackening, there is no whitening. Without dissolution, no rebirth. You are not lazy. You are in Nigredo. You are not broken. You are dissolving. You are not done. You are being prepared. Let me say it another way. Nigredo is not failure. It is initiation. You are not being punished. You are being cooked. The furnace must burn away what you are not, so that what you are can survive the flame. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Nigredo is precisely this, the plunge into blackness, so that you may discover that blackness is fertile soil. Now, let's test whether you are here. In the next movement, I will give you the 8 signs of Nigredo, markers that show you are not in laziness, but in transformation. If you recognize them, you will know that your fire has not gone out. It is molting. How do you know you are in Nigredo and not simply collapsing into apathy? Jung left us clues, 8 markers that what looks like decay is in fact initiation. 1. Value-reward decoupling. The things that once gave you energy no longer move you. Promotions, compliments, even pleasures feel strangely hollow. Jung observed that once the mask begins to dissolve, the psyche refuses to release energy for goals rooted in ego or social conditioning. 2. Symbolic minimalism. You begin purging, not to tidy up, but to empty. Old clothes, outdated friendships, cluttered ambitions. The drive is not optimization, it is erasure. Jung saw this as the psyche clearing psychic space, making room for something not yet born. 3. Temporal distortion. Time feels broken, days stretch endlessly, while weeks vanish without notice. Jung noted that patients in Nigredo often describe life as paused, as if caught between death and rebirth. 4. Selective energy bursts. Though drained most of the time, you sometimes experience sudden focus, often around something meaningful, symbolic, or creative. This energy is not random. It is a preview of the new fire to come. 5. Social shedding. Small talk becomes unbearable. Crowds feel suffocating. Solitude feels strangely alive. Jung taught that individuation often begins with a withdrawal from the collective mask, a retreat into the depths where the authentic self is forged. 6. Fate encounters. Synchronicities begin clustering. You meet the right book, the right teacher, the right sentence at exactly the right moment. Jung saw this as the psyche signaling through meaningful coincidence that a deeper pattern is emerging. 7. Shadow surfacing. Irritation, envy, grief, all the emotions you buried under busyness now rise to the surface. Nigredo is not sterile. It is compost. What you feel as toxicity is simply the raw material of transformation. 8. Creative pressure. Without product ideas thrum within you, dreams feel vivid. Yet when you try to act, you falter. Jung described this as psychic magma, molten potential under a crust, not yet broken. The eruption will come, but first the pressure must build. If you see yourself in these signs, you are not lazy. You are in the crucible. What the world calls collapse is, in truth, gestation. Because the psyche has stripped away false fuel, therefore it is forcing you to wait until the real fire can emerge. This pause is not emptiness, it is incubation. But beware, there are dangers here. Misread Nigredo, and you can derail your transformation completely. In the next movement, I will show you the 3 gravest dangers of mistaking this sacred stage for weakness. If you are in Nigredo, you are in holy territory. But the most dangerous thing you can do is misread it. Jung warned that when people interpret this stage as weakness instead of transformation, they fall into 3 destructive traps. Danger 1. Pathologizing the pause. You tell yourself, I'm depressed, I'm lazy, I'm broken. Out of fear, you medicate with stimulants, distractions, or endless self-improvement hacks. Jung observed patients who mistook Nigredo for a clinical defect rather than a sacred process. The result? They wasted years running from what was meant to heal them. Because they believed the pause was failure, therefore they fled from the very furnace meant to forge them. Danger 2. Spiritual bypass. Instead of staying with the shadow, you float above it. You repeat affirmations, binge spiritual content, meditate to escape rather than to integrate. Jung called this bypassing, a refusal to metabolize the darkness by pretending to already be light. But Nigredo is not optional. The more you bypass, the louder the shadow becomes, until it cracks through in eruptions you cannot control. Danger 3. Premature renaissance. You get restless and try to build a new identity too quickly, a new career, a new relationship, a new project, anything to feel alive again. But this rush solidifies into a brittle persona, another mask layered over the ashes of the old one. Jung warned that when the new self is forced too early, it collapses under pressure, often more violently than the old one. Here lies the paradox. The greatest danger is not the darkness itself, but your attempt to escape it. Nigredo only destroys those who refuse to let it transform them. Therefore, pathologize the pause and you chase the wrong cure. Bypass the shadow and you trap yourself in illusion. Rush the rebirth and you condemn yourself to repeat the cycle. The truth? Nigredo is survivable, but only if you measure progress differently. In the next section, we will explore new metrics, how to track depth instead of speed, and how to recognize transformation even when nothing seems to be happening. Most people measure progress in miles per hour. They want speed, output, visible achievement. But Nigredo demands a different ruler. If you keep scoring your life by old metrics, money earned, tasks completed, goals checked off, you will declare yourself a failure. Jung warned that during transformation, the psyche moves in depth, not speed. Progress is vertical, not horizontal. It doesn't look like running forward. It looks like sinking down. So what should you measure? 1. Clarity intervals. Don't track how many tasks you finished today. Track how many minutes you experienced genuine clarity. Even one moment of authentic insight outweighs a week of busy distraction. 2. Shadow dialogues logged. Did you face your irritation, envy, grief, instead of avoiding them? Jung's method of active imagination depended on this, giving voice to the shadow, not suppressing it. Every page of dialogue is a mile traveled inward. 3. Symbol sightings. How often do you notice recurring dreams, synchronicities, archetypal images? Jung taught that symbols are the unconscious speaking. Record them. They are your compass in the dark. 4. Restoration. Quality sleep, stillness, solitude. Are they empty or do they restore? Depth is measured by how deeply you rest into being, not how many hours you grind in doing. 5. Energy authenticity. When you did act, did it feel forced or aligned? Even a single aligned act, a phone call, a sketch, a journal entry, carries more power than 100 acts done from panic. Here is the paradox. In Nigredo, less is more. Because the psyche is composting the old self, therefore it demands patience, subtlety, and the willingness to redefine what progress looks like. Jung wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, only outgrown. Outgrowing cannot be measured by speed. It is measured by depth." So stop asking, "How fast am I moving?" and start asking, "How deeply am I sinking?" Now that we have reframed the scorecard, the question becomes practical. How do you actually rekindle fire without betraying the process? In the next movement, I will reveal the reignition method, beginning with phase 1, the descent. Once you've accepted that Nigredo is not laziness, but initiation, the first task is to stabilize the container. Why? Because fire cannot be rekindled in a cracked vessel. Jung saw this mistake often, patients trying to ignite purpose before creating a psyche strong enough to hold it. Think of it as preparing the furnace before striking the flame. Phase 1 is not about grand vision. It is about descent, containment, and steady ground. Practice 1. Void hygiene, 10 minutes daily. Sit with one unanswered question, no phone, no book, no distractions. The question is not to be solved, but to be held. Jung believed unanswered questions act as psychological magnets. They draw new images and impulses from the unconscious. By tolerating silence, you prepare space for the whisper of authentic desire. Practice 2. Somatic anchors, 5x per day. Every few hours, pause. Inhale slowly. Adjust your posture. Release the jaw. These mini resets are not trivial. Jung observed that when the body collapses under tension, the psyche follows. Anchoring the body stabilizes the mind, keeping the container intact. Practice 3. Symbol tracking. Keep a log of recurring dreams, phrases, or images. Maybe a bird keeps appearing. Maybe a word repeats in conversations. Jung insisted the unconscious speaks in symbols, and ignoring them is like throwing away letters from your soul. Collect these fragments. They are coordinates on your inner map. Because the psyche speaks through symbol, therefore noticing patterns becomes the compass for your descent. You are not asked to interpret everything immediately, only to notice and to trust that what repeats carries weight. This phase feels simple, even underwhelming, but simplicity is the point. Nigredo disorients you, descent stabilizes you. You are building a container strong enough to carry the molten self that will emerge later. Jung wrote, "The individual has to be taken down into the depths, into the unconscious, if he is to be raised up again." This descent is not punishment, it is preparation. Once you've stabilized the container, the next phase begins, integration. Here, you harvest the shadow for fuel, turning what once haunted you into the very energy that drives you forward. With the container stabilized, you are ready for the most difficult and most rewarding work of Nigredo, integration. If Phase 1 is about descent, Phase 2 is about combustion. You take what was once poison and burn it as fuel. Jung taught that the shadow, the rejected, denied, or disowned aspects of yourself, holds not just darkness, but energy. Every irritation, every envy, every forbidden desire is psychic wattage trapped behind a wall of repression. Because you pushed it down, therefore it festers. But once brought into consciousness, it becomes fire. Here are the methods. 1. Active imagination. Light sit quietly, bring to mind a troubling image, a face, a dream figure, a recurring thought. Instead of dismissing it, dialogue with it. Ask, what do you want from me, not from me? Jung pioneered this practice, discovering that inner figures carry guidance when listened to instead of suppressed. The shadow speaks in riddles, but beneath them lies instruction. 2. Envy as breadcrumbs, notice who stirs envy in you. Do you resent their confidence, their freedom, their creativity? Envy is not proof of your failure. It is a mirror of your exiled desires. Jung wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Follow envy, and you will find your own buried longing. 3. Guilt disobedience. Distinguish two guilts. Moral guilt, when you betray your integrity. Boundary guilt, when you simply refuse to please others. Most people confuse the two and stay enslaved to false obligations. Jung observed that empaths especially collapse under boundary guilt. Learning to disobey it frees immense energy for authentic life. 4. Anger as compass. Your anger is not random. It reveals where your boundaries have been violated or where you have abandoned yourself. Instead of exploding outward, redirect anger inward as heat for transformation. Because anger exposes what you can no longer tolerate, therefore it points directly to what must change. When you do this work, something extraordinary happens. The emotions that once drained you begin to empower you. Resentment becomes clarity. Fear becomes precision. Shame becomes authority. This is the alchemy Jung described as the transcendent function, the uniting of opposites into a higher synthesis. The shadow and the self, once enemies, become collaborators. But integration alone is not the end. Fire must not only be harvested, it must be directed. Which leads to Phase 3, reorientation, where the new flame is channeled into a compass for the life ahead. Now comes the turning. You have descended, you have integrated, and now you must reorient. If Nigredo is dissolution and integration is combustion, then reorientation is ignition. The fire you once thought was gone is revealed as a new flame, quieter but stronger, more deliberate. Jung discovered that once the shadow is harvested, the psyche begins to offer subtle signals of authentic desire. They are rarely grand visions at first. Instead, they appear as gentle pulls, faint curiosities, moments when the body relaxes and says, yes, here. To capture them, Jung outlined what we might call the three-channel compass. 1. Body truth notice. Where your body unclenches, around which people, in which places, during which activities does your breath deepen. Your musculature knows before your mind admits it. Jung insisted that the psyche is rooted in the body, and ignoring these signals leads to distortion. 2. Talent gravity. What do you do with frictionless skill, even when you resist it? Some write, some heal, some design, some listen. These are not accidents. Jung called this the call of the self, the unconscious pushing you toward expression beyond the ego's will. 3. Care signal. Ask, what would still matter if no one noticed? When the applause fades, what remains compelling? This signal cuts through ego illusions. It is care for its own sake, not care for reward. Jung saw this as the essence of individuation, living from inner necessity rather than outer validation. From these three channels, you begin forming what I call pilot projects. These are small, time-bound experiments, 2 to 4 weeks long, designed not to prove yourself, but to test resonance. A pilot project is like striking flint, a small spark, enough to see if the fire catches. Why small? Because experiments reduce existential risk. You are not committing your entire life to a grand narrative. You are testing whether your psyche's new flame can hold steady in the wind. Because the psyche cannot leap from void to empire, therefore you must allow it to whisper before it shouts. Pilot projects are the bridge from spark to signal. And when you live by signal rather than speed, something profound happens. Clarity compounds. What began as a faint inclination becomes a magnetic pull, and that pull begins to orient your days, your weeks, your years. This is the beginning of Individuation's rebirth cycle. Not a return to the old motivation, but the first taste of a fire that cannot be extinguished, because it belongs to you. But whispers can vanish if not structured. That is why the next stage is practical. Building a 30-day protocol that safeguards your new fire until it stabilizes into rhythm. You now carry a fragile flame. If left unprotected, it flickers out. If forced, it burns too hot and collapses. What you need is rhythm, a protocol that both protects and strengthens your reoriented fire. Jung emphasized that individuation is not achieved in one revelation, but through daily symbolic practice. So here is the 30-day Nigredo protocol. Think of it as scaffolding for the new self. Morning, signal first, approx 60 minutes. Begin with a signal scan. Write down one impulse, dream fragment, or body truth from the previous day. Follow it with one deep thing. Devote your freshest energy to a single meaningful task, writing, creating, learning. Even 45 minutes is enough. Jung noted that authenticity strengthens when attended to before outer obligations consume the psyche. Midday, social gate. Permit one aligned conversation per day. If no such conversation is available, keep the gate closed. Jung warned that constant chatter dilutes psychic energy, scattering the fire before it matures. Evening, symbol review, 15 minutes. Revisit your symbol log. Note any repetitions across dreams, encounters, or synchronicities. Jung called this living symbolically, orienting life not by logic alone, but by recurring inner images. Write tomorrow's single commitment, one aligned action you will protect. Weekly, 2 anchors. Shadow office hours, 60 minutes. A set time for active imagination, journaling, or dialogue with shadow figures. This prevents eruptions by creating space for integration. Nature immersion. At least one walk without headphones, phone, or agenda. Jung believed the psyche recalibrates through direct contact with nature, the original mirror of the unconscious. Fail-safes, the half-habit rule. On low-energy days, do half the habit rather than none. 5 minutes instead of 10. A paragraph instead of a page. Jung warned that what is not made conscious appears in our lives as fate. The half-habit keeps you in dialogue with consciousness, even when depleted. Because small consistency builds trust, therefore the psyche begins to stabilize around new rhythms. Within 30 days, you won't yet have a fully ignited fire, but you will have a hearth strong enough to hold it. But beware, even with structure, certain pitfalls threaten to undo the work. And if you're not careful, you may slide back into the old illusions. In the next section, I will reveal the 4 common pitfalls that derail transformation and how to avoid them. Even with a protocol, many stumble in Nigredo because the psyche has 1,000 ways of tricking you back into sleep. Jung warned that shadow work without vigilance often collapses into self-sabotage. These are the 4 most common pitfalls and how to outmaneuver them. Pitfall 1. Productivity whiplash. You suddenly feel energy return, and in panic you sprint back into old habits, work binges, endless projects, frantic proving. This burns the fragile flame. Cure, cap your sprints. 1 focused hour, then stop. Jung noted that the unconscious feeds integration slowly. Rushing collapses it into exhaustion. Pitfall 2. Aesthetic over substance. You polish journals, curate vision boards, and perfect rituals, while avoiding the raw dialogue with your shadow. This is decoration, not integration. Cure. Prioritize content over container. A messy shadow dialogue is more transformative than a beautiful but empty practice. Pitfall 3. Isolation as identity. You confuse solitude with superiority. You withdraw not for restoration but for pride, telling yourself no one is worthy of your company. Jung called this inflation, identifying with archetypal energy instead of remaining human. Cure. Maintain a minimum viable tribe, 2 people who see you clearly. Pitfall 4. Myth inflation. You mistake symbols for final truths. A dream, synchronicity, or archetype becomes a rigid doctrine. Instead of guiding you, it imprisons you. Cure. Hold all symbols provisionally. Jung insisted that the unconscious speaks in metaphors, not dogma. If you grip too tightly, you miss the next message. Because Nigredo dismantles the ego, therefore the ego will resist, disguising sabotage as insight. Recognizing these traps is itself a form of integration. You see the trick, you don't fall for it. But beyond pitfalls, there are practices, habits that sustain the fragile fire long after the first 30 days. In the next section, I will reveal 5 daily maintenance practices that keep the psyche aligned with depth rather than illusion. Integration is not a single event. It is a rhythm that must be sustained. Jung reminded us that the unconscious never sleeps. It keeps pressing forward, whether we attend to it or not. Without maintenance, the fragile gains of Nigredo dissolve back into chaos. Here are 5 practices that preserve momentum and prevent relapse. 1. Morning question ritual. Upon waking, write down one question for the day, not what must I do, but what is asking to be seen. Jung believed questions create psychic tension, a magnet for unconscious material. Living with the right questions keeps the inner dialogue alive. 2. Daily shadow check-in. At day's end, ask, when did I feel irritation, envy, shame, or guilt? Instead of dismissing these moments, record them. They are doorways. Jung taught that shadow material grows poisonous only when unacknowledged. 3. Symbol, log expansion. Keep noting dreams, synchronicities, repeating images. Over weeks, review your log and look for patterns. This transforms isolated fragments into a symbolic map of your individuation process. 4. Minimum viable tribe. Protect at least 2 relationships with people who can hold depth without demand. Jung warned that isolation without witness leads to distortion, but overexposure to shallow company leads to dissipation. A small circle of resonance is enough to keep you human. 5. Weekly act of creation. Do one act of creation not tied to productivity. Paint, write, cook, design, even rearrange a room. Jung himself sculpted and painted his inner visions into form. Expression stabilizes energy, otherwise it festers. Because the psyche abhors stagnation, therefore maintenance practices prevent the unconscious from flooding you. Instead, they let the current flow steadily. But practices are not enough. To deepen conviction, we must look at history, at figures who illustrate what happens when Nigredo is mishandled, and those who show what becomes possible when it is endured. Nigredo is not new. Every age has seen souls enter it, some collapsing under its weight, others transfigured by its fire. Jung often turned to history and myth to illustrate the 2 outcomes. The cautionary figure. Think of the brilliant mind who rushed through Nigredo too soon. Outwardly, they rebuilt quickly. New projects, new persona, new mask. But beneath, the fire never stabilized. Their collapse came later, harder. Scandals, breakdowns, self-destruction. Jung called this premature rebirth, the attempt to crown oneself before enduring the furnace. It is the fate of those who mistake restlessness for readiness. The exemplary figure. Now picture the creator who lingered in darkness longer than others thought wise. They withdrew, endured whispers of failure, even ridicule. But when they emerged, their work bore a density that ordinary ambition cannot match. Fewer works, but immortal ones. Jung believed this patience mirrored the alchemical process. Nigredo, Albedo, Citrinitas, Rubedo, stages that cannot be skipped without shattering the vessel. One destroyed themselves by refusing to stay in the crucible. The other became a beacon by consenting to the full cycle of dissolution and rebirth. Because history is not merely past, therefore it is a mirror. The question is not whether Nigredo destroys or exalts, but whether you consent to let it cook you fully. And so the question turns to you. How do you take this arc, cautionary and exemplary, and apply it to your own life today? The answer is to build your own personal fire plan, a map drawn from your signs, your shadow, and your pilot projects. You have studied the terrain. You know the dangers, the signals, the phases. Now the task is to chart your own fire plan, your personal compass for navigating Nigredo into rebirth. Jung believed that transformation without conscious participation risks becoming mere fate. With intention, it becomes destiny. Take a page or simply pause and reflect, and fill in these 4 anchors. 1. My current signs. From the 8 Nigredo signs, choose 3 that describe you most clearly. Are you dissolving routines, feeling bursts of selective energy, watching synchronicities cluster? Write them down. Naming them is the first act of orientation. 2. My shadow fuel identify 1 envy and 1 irritation. Who stirs jealousy in you, and why? What irritation recurs? These are not enemies, they are fuel. Jung wrote that everything which irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. 3. My pilot project, choose a small time-bound experiment that resonates with your body, truth, talent, gravity, or care signal. Not a 5-year plan. A 2-4-week test. Perhaps writing a short story, volunteering, beginning a practice. Define the scope, the start date, and the measure of completion. 4. My minimum viable tribe list 1 witness and 1 peer. The witness sees you without demand. The peer grows alongside you. These 2 prevent both distortion in solitude and dissipation in shallow company. Jung insisted individuation is not isolation. It requires at least minimal dialogue with the outer world. Finally, write 1 sentence naming your season. I am in Nigredo. I am composting toward signal. Because when the psyche is named, therefore it stabilizes. This plan does not eliminate darkness, but it ensures you are walking it consciously. Now, having mapped your fire plan, we zoom out. Why does this matter not just for you, but for the culture around you? What happens when individuals endure Nigredo with awareness instead of collapsing into distraction? That is the larger stake, the cultural dimension of your transformation. Your Nigredo is not just about you. Jung warned that the fate of humanity hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. Which means your inner fire is not a private luxury. It is part of the collective furnace. We live in an age addicted to speed. Productivity is worshipped, attention is harvested, noise is monetized. In such a world, your pause looks like failure. But in truth, it is rebellion. Because the collective rushes forward without depth, therefore individuals who consent to depth become cultural medicine. Consider what happens when even a handful of people endure Nigredo consciously. They stop feeding on counterfeit purposes. They withdraw from manipulation, advertising, propaganda. They no longer chase illusions of worth through status or consumption. And when they return, they carry a flame that cannot be bought, sold, or stolen. Jung called this individuation, a life lived from the self rather than the mask. Such lives ripple outward. Families reorganize, communities shift, cultures bend. This is why your fire matters now. not because the world needs more productive people, but because it needs more whole ones, not because civilization demands faster wheels, but because it is desperate for deeper roots. Your Nigredo, endured consciously, is a counterweight to the collective shallowness of our time. It is not merely personal therapy, it is cultural resistance. And so, we return to where we began, the paradox. The danger isn't that you lost your fire. The danger is believing that the silence inside means you are broken. Your fire did not die, it molted. What you called emptiness was not failure, but initiation. What you called laziness was not collapse, but Nigredo, the sacred blackening, the composting of a self too small to hold who you are becoming. Integration means this. Instead of running from the void, you build a conscious relationship with it. Instead of fearing the darkness, you learn to harvest it for fuel. Instead of begging the old fires to return, you prepare a container for the new flame, smaller, steadier, infinitely more authentic. And here is the commission. Use this fire not merely for yourself, but as cultural medicine. Let it reshape how you work, how you love, how you create. Refuse counterfeit purposes. Refuse premature masks. Refuse to hand your life back to the scripts that once kept you asleep. Because every time one person endures Nigredo with awareness, the collective psyche shifts. Families reorganize. Cultures heal. Futures open. So name your signs. Choose your shadow fuel. Begin your pilot project. Guard your minimum tribe. And carry your fire forward. Your task is not speed. Your task is depth. Your task is not to rekindle the old flame, but to protect the ember of the new one until it grows into a light no darkness can consume. Your fire didn't die, it molted. Your pause is not your end, it is your threshold. Step across.